Denver International Airport isn't just an airport. At 53 square miles, it's officially larger than Manhattan, and that scale continues to raise questions. In 2025, construction work exposed underground structures that officials called abandoned projects, but new testimonies from workers and unusual finds revived speculation about what lies beneath. At the same time, DIA handled roughly 82 million passengers in 2024, ranking among the busiest airports on Earth and expanding its global role. We'll explore the art that unsettles travelers, the baggage fiasco that never seems to end, the tunnels contractors weren't meant to uncover, and the claims from those who built it. But before any of that, there's one basic fact about this place that makes all the other mysteries harder to ignore. Bigger than a city. 53 square miles. That's how much land Denver International Airport occupies, an area so vast it surpasses the size of many US cities. For perspective, Manhattan measures about 22.8 square miles. Denver's airport is more than twice that. If you stand at one edge, the opposite boundary disappears against the horizon. The scale is not just unusual, it is unmatched among most airports of its class. Most airports expand in line with demand, but DIA was built differently. For comparison, Hartsfield, Jackson, Atlanta, one of the busiest hubs in the world, handles more passengers on a fraction of the land. DIA's landholding, over 33,000 acres, is unusually large even for a major transfer point. The official explanation is straightforward. Planners in the late 1980s acquired sweeping acreage to prevent the kinds of congestion problems that plagued older facilities. They wanted a vast, unconstrained aerotropolis with room to grow for centuries. On paper, it was forward-thinking. By spacing runways far apart, they could allow simultaneous landings and takeoffs, improving efficiency even in adverse weather. By carving out wide buffers, they could build without hitting the limits faced by airports hemmed in by cities. That is the reasoning officials still cite. But there's an undeniable fact. Decades later, broad sections of land remain fenced off and largely untouched. Satellite views show mile after mile of grassland inside DIA's perimeter, with no paved facilities, no commercial development, nothing at all to suggest aviation use. This lingering emptiness has fueled speculation. If not all of that acreage is needed for flights, what is it held for? Here the official records help provide context. Airport documentation acknowledges that roughly 16,000 acres of DIA's land is categorized as non-aviation. Far from being abandoned, that acreage is earmarked for compatible development under what Denver calls its airport city or aerotropolis model, essentially real estate projects, logistics hubs, and business districts designed to tie directly into air travel. In this framing, DIA becomes not just an airport, but the nucleus of an economic zone. That rationale is straightforward on paper, yet critics note progress has been slow. Many of those acres are still grass fields 3 decades after opening. This creates a tension. The vision of futuristic growth remains, but the visible lack of construction continues to raise eyebrows. For some observers, the gap between the plan and the present invites suspicion that perhaps the airport is concealing alternate uses for its undeveloped tracts. The airport's turbulent birth only heightens curiosity. Construction in the 1990s encountered years of delays, billions in cost overruns, and frequent contractor turnover. Large projects with this degree of financial bloat often unintentionally create lasting doubt, a sense that what taxpayers were told may not be the whole story. In DIA's case, the extraordinary land purchase is interpreted by skeptics less as preparation and more as a deliberate overshoot, a chance to secure space for purposes never detailed publicly. Still, the airport's defenders point to geography and climate as justification. Denver sits high on the plains, nearly a mile above sea level, with weather that can change suddenly and dramatically. Wide separation between runways and extra acreage for shifting flight patterns gives operators flexibility. In theory, that need for operational resilience justifies some overbuilding. But here again, comparisons invite questions. Airports in other cold weather climates with equally heavy flight volumes from Toronto to Munich, operate effectively on much smaller plots. Denver's unique challenges explain some of the sprawl, but not its entire magnitude. What stands out is how the expansion pattern has played out. Rather than gradually filling the inner gaps close to the terminals, DIA has frequently invested in underground works or scattered developments across isolated sections of its perimeter. This approach has seemed inconsistent with maximizing efficiency for passengers. It does, however, sustain the perception that substantial space has been held back for reasons beyond air travel. By 2024, traffic figures proved that Denver had not simply overbuilt without cause. The airport processed over 82 million passengers, cementing itself among the busiest airports on Earth. But even then, its size remained disproportionate to immediate aviation needs. Atlanta, by contrast, moved more traffic on far less land. That imbalance keeps alive the central mystery. Why is so much of DIA's vast area still unused, even after the flood of passengers had arrived? From one angle, the story is pragmatic, a grand vision of planning ahead, an aerotropolis designed to anchor Denver's economy far into the 21st century. From another, it remains puzzling, millions of square feet unpaved, fenced off, and unexplained to casual observers. The consequence is simple: the more empty space that lingers, the more questions arise. And it is this question of space, so much space, far more than travelers will ever notice, that leads people to consider not just what stretches outward across the plain, but what might extend downward beneath it. With so much land seemingly held back from public use, curiosity naturally shifts away from the surface to what lies underground. The tunnels they weren't supposed to find. In 2024, Denver International Airport launched a major expansion project tied to the West Gates Pond development. Construction included building thousands of feet of new underground tunnels, over 5,000 feet in total, designed to handle stormwater and collect de-icing fluids from the runways. These projects were public, documented in airport planning releases, and explained as necessary utility improvements for one of the world's busiest hubs. The work was not secret, yet at the same time, reports from contractors suggested that during excavation, crews came into contact with passages that were not on the blueprints, and those discoveries quickly drew attention outside official channels. From the airport's perspective, everything could be explained by infrastructure already known to exist. Since the 1990s, sections of an automated baggage system had stretched beneath the concourses, much of it abandoned after the project collapsed in failure. Photos of those half-finished conveyor lines have circulated for years, showing why unexpected tunnels sometimes appear when new digging breaks into older layers. Officials framed the 2024 reports within that same context. These were leftovers, the byproducts of expansion plans that never worked as intended. But the contractors who actually entered some of the uncovered spaces questioned that reasoning. They expected to see shell corridors or jagged spaces resembling abandoned work sites. Instead, some reported finding smooth, finished walls reinforced with concrete far more substantial than what a baggage tunnel would normally require. In a few places, they described brackets and fittings for utilities, even though no wiring or piping had ever been installed. For them, the construction looked too deliberate, too polished, to be easily written off as another failed baggage spur. Anonymous accounts claimed that several of these tunnels extended past the boundaries outlined on official schematics. When workers mapped their positions against known infrastructure, pieces failed to line up. According to their testimonies, a handful of shafts descended further, suggesting at least one additional level beyond what was supposed to exist. Some whistleblowers described spaces wide enough to resemble staging bays rather than narrow conveyor corridors, and one detail repeated across accounts stood out. Ventilation and climate control features seemed integrated into the structure. If accurate, that would imply preparation for human occupancy, not baggage handling. Airport representatives rejected those descriptions, pointing again to the legacy baggage system and the new fluid control tunnels as the only subterranean works constructed. They argued that utility networks often look larger than people expect, and that unfinished expansion areas can easily be mistaken for something more mysterious. To reinforce their explanation, they pointed to the early 1990s baggage fiasco, which left mile after mile of tunnels that never found a purpose. Heavy concrete could have been used to shore up shifting soils, they said, rather than to withstand prolonged human presence. Still, the matter wasn't that clear-cut. Several contractors who worked different parts of the 2024 project without contact with one another later described similar impressions of what they had seen: long spaces disconnected from the baggage tracks, multiple levels, and corridors branching into nowhere. That consistency gave their accounts a weight that simple misunderstanding didn't quite cover. Some even circulated photos online, showing lit, reinforced hallways that didn't resemble the conveyor-littered baggage ruins or the simpler straight-line water tunnels. These images sharpened questions about whether early phases of DIA construction had included far more extensive planning than was ever acknowledged. Observers outside the airport compared the tunnel engineering to civil defense projects and hardened shelters seen around the world. For them, the depth of reinforcing, the scale of excavation, and the apparent allowance for ventilation surpassed what utility tunnels would normally justify. They pointed out that airports elsewhere, even those with abandoned underground systems, tend to leave behind fragmentary passages or unreinforced cavities, not finished corridors with industrial supports. Critics countered that without blueprints in hand, outsiders might be judging incorrectly, reading ominous intent into what could simply be overbuilt foundations. The history of Denver International's construction only added fuel to the debate. When the airport was built in the early 1990s, costs overran by billions of dollars, and the project faced constant delays. Critics at the time wondered how an airport could have absorbed so much extra money. Later, noticing unexpected contractor names, some with defense industry ties, skeptics suggested that part of the budget may have funded underground facilities the public was never told about. The resurfacing of uncharted tunnels decades later only reinforced that narrative, even if direct evidence remains fragmentary. After the 2024 findings spread, a wave of amateur research appeared online. Digital maps attempted to catalog details reported by workers, linking supposed access points, ventilation shafts in unusual places, and sealed doors hidden behind maintenance walls. While much of this effort mixed interpretation with speculation, certain inconsistencies were difficult to reject outright. The airport's own diagrams showed one version of the underground network. Eyewitness accounts implied another, and at least some photographs revealed conditions that lined up more closely with the latter. The airport continued to stress that what looked like extra layers were either artifacts of failed projects or necessary reinforcements for Colorado's soil and weather. And certainly, many of the unusual structures could be explained that way. Yet the qualities that stood out, smooth concrete, climate control fittings, multi-level descriptions, remained unaccounted for in any official explanation. Even those who normally cast doubt on conspiracy theories admitted that DIA's unusual construction choices leave ample gray areas. What happened in 2024 didn't prove the existence of hidden bunkers or Cold War-style command facilities under Denver International. It did, however, confirm two truths at once: that very real new tunnels are being built for routine function, like de-icing and stormwater collection, and that other passages recorded by workers don't seem to match the official maps in circulation. The tension between those two realities is what keeps the story alive. Public utility projects explain part of the underground, but not necessarily all of it. And the persistence of unexplained underground space ties back to another nagging reminder of Denver International's unusual history. The airport's most infamous underground feature isn't a secret chamber or a hidden bunker. It's a failed experiment in baggage automation. That project left entire networks of abandoned conveyors sealed beneath the runways, and every time construction crews encounter them, they become part of DIA's mythology all over again. A baggage system that refuses to work. When people talk about Denver International's strangest flaws, one problem keeps resurfacing: the airport's baggage system. From its very first day of operation, It was meant to be the crown jewel of a futuristic airport. In the mid-1990s, DIA promoted a fully automated network that would carry suitcases from check-in to aircraft using underground conveyors controlled entirely by computer. The pitch was simple: no more long delays, no more misplaced bags, and no more frantic staff moving carts across crowded terminals. If it worked, passengers would receive their luggage faster than anywhere else in the world. In reality, it became one of the most expensive failures in commercial aviation history. The original Automated Baggage System, or ABS, was unveiled with great ambition but almost immediately broke down. Luggage was chewed up by misaligned rollers, thrown from belts onto the floor, or sent in circles to the wrong gates. Airlines complained they could not depend on it. News outlets turned the system into a running joke, calling it an embarrassment for a brand new airport already plagued by delays and cost overruns. Because the system required so many corrections before it could operate reliably, it contributed to DIA's opening being pushed back until 1995. By the time planes finally took off from the new facility, the ABS had already become infamous for failing at its only task. For years after the launch, engineers kept trying to solve the problems. Millions were poured into upgrades, software tweaks, and rushed maintenance. Yet the system never achieved the seamless dream promised in the glossy marketing of the early 1990s. By the mid-2000s, most of the network had been shut down entirely, and airlines reverted to traditional manual sorting and transport. The only parts that stayed in use were smaller segments connected to United Airlines operations. Eventually, those too were decommissioned. By 2005, what remained underground was mostly idle machinery, miles of belts, sensors, and abandoned automated carts left buried beneath the concrete. So much equipment had been built into the foundation of the airport that removing it became more expensive than simply leaving it out of sight. This is why pieces of that failed network still exist beneath concourses today. The cost of the fiasco was staggering. Reports vary on exactly how much money disappeared into the project, but everyone agrees it ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Industry observers widely regard it as one of the most expensive baggage system failures in aviation history. That reputation stuck to DIA for decades, painting it as a place where technology promises collapsed under their own weight. It also helped shape the perception that the airport was mismanaged from the beginning, with ambitions far beyond what was practical. Nearly 3 decades later, in the early 2020s, airport officials attempted once more to modernize baggage handling. By then, Denver's passenger numbers had exploded, straining the infrastructure. Federal support helped fund new baggage projects, and DIA announced plans to introduce more efficient systems with updated scanners, smarter control software, and redesigned conveyors. The idea was not to resurrect the old ABS, but to create a new platform learned from modern airports like Dubai, Amsterdam, and Munich, where automation already worked at scale. The hope was to finally put an end to the bad reputation lingering from the 1990s debacle. But implementation was harder than advertised. In 2023, during trials of the most recent upgrades, glitches appeared again. Bags became caught in choke points, conveyors halted unpredictably, and sensors misread loads. Though these breakdowns were not as catastrophic as the original ABS collapse, they damaged public trust quickly. Many travelers saw delays at baggage carousels, while airport staff were forced to step in manually. News reports recycled the old narrative. Denver can build the world's largest airport, but it cannot get luggage handling right. What made these struggles more frustrating to observers was the contrast with other global airports. Elsewhere, automation had become routine. In Europe and Asia, systems already sorted, scanned, and routed luggage with high reliability. Why was Denver still falling short? Airport officials offered explanations. Denver's size is unusual, its layout more sprawling, and its passenger growth exceeded projections. Coordinating an overhaul of baggage handling in such a large, complex facility posed challenges that smaller airports never had to face. Still, for passengers waiting at carousels, those justifications did little to ease irritation. Internally, the situation highlighted the problem of legacy infrastructure. Because so much of the old ABS hardware was embedded in the airport's foundations, newer upgrades often had to work around outdated equipment rather than start fresh. Engineers noted that loads of conveyor tunnels still existed underground, empty or partially dismantled, but still dictating where newer systems could realistically be installed. This legacy spiderweb complicated improvements in a way most travelers could not see, but staff understood all too well. What looked like incompetence from the outside often came down to the difficulty of revamping a system built on flawed foundations. Despite these explanations, the baggage issues continued to fuel suspicion. For years, whenever construction unearthed pieces of the abandoned ABS, people asked why so much money had been wasted building it in the first place, and whether some of that infrastructure had purposes beyond luggage. Officially, it was just a badly conceived system abandoned by 2005. Unofficially, the reminders of those tunnels kept sparking questions about what else might have been constructed underground. Because Denver repeatedly failed to demonstrate reliable automation above the surface, each rediscovery of hidden infrastructure seemed to confirm the airport had priorities other than efficiency. For travelers, the baggage problems mean inconvenience. Lost bags create delays, force staff to track down missing items, and cause frustration at one of the busiest airports on Earth. For analysts, the issue is larger, a symbol of how DIA's operational image never fully recovered from its high-profile stumble in the 1990s. Even when it secures modernization funding today, the airport still wrestles with the baggage legacy, unable to make the clean break it has long desired. That ongoing frustration feeds into the atmosphere of doubt surrounding DIA. Passengers and workers alike question why the airport, with all its size and resources, never seems to master baggage handling. Some take that as simple mismanagement, while others see it as part of a bigger pattern of unexplained underground works and misplaced spending. Whatever the interpretation, one outcome is the same. The baggage story leaves DIA looking less like a model of innovation and more like a misstep that never healed. Because the automated baggage dream collapsed so publicly and so permanently, any new excavation or unexpected underground detail is judged through that lens. The original system was supposed to show Denver International as the airport of the future. Instead, it turned into a case study in overpromise and underdeliver. And every time people hear of secret tunnels, sealed rooms, or repurposed sublevels, they remember the baggage debacle and assume once again that something is being hidden where passengers cannot go. The perception may or may not be fair, but its effects are lasting. Nearly 30 years after opening, a broken baggage system still shapes how people think about what Denver International hides from view. And while that baggage history anchors suspicions about what lies below, the airport's most visible mysteries lie not underground at all, but plastered right on its walls. Artworks so unsettling and so widely discussed that removing them only made the questions louder. The murals, they changed. For decades, one of the most striking features inside Denver International wasn't hidden underground at all, but hung directly on the walls, its murals. Unlike the calming landscapes or regional imagery common in airports meant to soothe travelers, the paintings that lined DIA's concourses depicted vivid, often unsettling scenes. Visitors saw smoke curling from ruined cities, military troops looming over crowds of children, and extinct-looking creatures preserved as if the natural world had ended. The largest pieces spanned entire walls, demanding attention from anyone walking past. To some viewers, the imagery seemed profound and allegorical, but to many others, it looked more like a bleak prophecy than decoration for a busy travel hub. The artist behind those works, Leo Tanguma, provided a very different explanation. In interviews, he described the murals as two-part narratives, one panel showing humanity's darkest outcomes, war, oppression, environmental collapse, and another then presenting the possibility of recovery, peace, and community across cultures. His stated intent was not to glorify destruction, but to emphasize that cooperation could overcome chaos. In his words, the imagery was meant to promote peace, even if it did so by first confronting the reality of violence. Still, For someone pausing in front of a masked soldier, raising a weapon over crying children, that hopeful reading was difficult to reconcile with what they saw. Over time, those paintings became inseparable from the mythology of the airport. Travelers documented them in photos, writers analyzed their symbolism, and commentators argued over whether they represented social critique or something more sinister. Online forums frequently highlighted the starkest details: children in coffins, flames consuming skylines, soldiers in gas masks. Combined with DIA's tunnels and cost overruns, the murals helped cement the airport's reputation as a place where appearances rarely made sense. Then, beginning in 2023, travelers noticed the murals changing. During construction for the Great Hall renovation project, workers began to dismantle and remove large sections of wall art. Passengers compared photos online and realized that whole panels were missing. That discovery quickly circulated through forums. One minute the murals were there, the next, sections were boxed away, and once that happened, forums exploded with questions. By 2024, significant portions of Tanguma's famous works had been placed into storage. The official explanation was straightforward. Airport representatives said the removal was linked to renovation and conservation. Much of the construction required dismantling walls and surfaces, and pieces of Tanguma's murals were either protected in storage or scheduled for eventual reinstallation once building work ended. From a preservation point of view, this made sense. It would have been easier to store the art than risk damaging it in an active construction site. Public response, however, told a different story. For travelers already primed to believe DIA held hidden agendas, the prospect of murals being boxed up looked less like conservation and more like censorship. Online comments framed the removals as deliberate concealment, not moving art for protection, but erasing symbols that were beginning to draw too much attention. The effect was immediate. The imagery itself had long raised speculation, but its sudden absence raised even more. Instead of unsettling details in plain sight, there were now empty stretches of wall reminding visitors something had been removed. The gaps made a stronger impression than the artwork itself. Visitors walking concourses where they once remembered full murals now saw bare plywood barriers or construction covers. Many interpreted those blank spaces as visible evidence that something sensitive had been scrubbed out. Critics argued that if the art's message were truly benign, officials could have redisplayed it elsewhere in the airport or, at minimum, explained its storage in detail. Instead, the vague official notes about renovation and logistics sounded evasive. That absence of clear public explanation meant the voids became symbols themselves, standing in for secrecy. Meanwhile, fragments left behind on a few walls created fresh misunderstandings. Panels where hopeful sections had been removed often left behind only grim scenes, isolated children, broken doves, jagged imagery without resolution. Travelers who did not know the full story assumed that was the totality of the message. Ironically, the removal stripped away the balance of Tanguma's narrative. What was intended as a progression from chaos to cooperation now looked interrupted, fragments frozen in despair. Without context, the peace symbolism was gone, and what remained seemed darker than ever. For conspiracy enthusiasts, the timing only fueled suspicion. Within the same span of years, DIA was digging new tunnels, struggling again with baggage failures, and dealing with construction secrecy. Against that backdrop, removing controversial murals without open explanation slotted neatly into a perceived pattern. Every unexplained change appeared to confirm a strategy of avoidance. Instead of confronting speculation, DIA removed points of discussion and gave skeptics more material in doing so. This reaction reflects a simple truth about public institutions. Most airports with controversial art will openly contextualize it, describing the artist's intentions or relocating pieces with full explanations. DIA chose instead to let discussion unfold online, remaining vague about its decisions and saying only that construction required art to be stored. The silence created its own vacuum. Rumors filled the space, and the disappearance of murals became more newsworthy than their presence ever had. That outcome transformed the murals into an example of how secrecy, even if unintentional, magnifies suspicion. What might have been read as metaphorical depictions of contemporary anxieties became interpreted as encoded warnings once they were no longer easily visible. Their absence suggested power had intervened, and in the absence of clear communication, people guessed why. In practice, those guesses wandered far from the artist's stated messages of peace and reconciliation. The ironic twist is clear. By placing the murals into storage for renovation, DIA amplified their importance. Before, they were unsettling backdrops amid the noise of travel. After removal, they became mysteries. Travelers now asked why certain artworks had been boxed away, whether they would ever return, and what the images really meant. Instead of moving on, audiences fixated on them more intensely. This dynamic fits seamlessly into DIA's reputation. Every change, however routine, is interpreted through the lens of secrecy and concealment. Even a genuine conservation effort could be read as a cover-up because of the airport's long history of unexplained cost overruns, unfinished systems, and rumors of underground projects. As a result, the murals were never just art. Their handling became another episode in a larger story. Whether seen as misplaced symbolism, temporarily displaced conservation pieces, or coded warnings scrubbed from view, the murals demonstrate how DIA feeds mystery not by what it shows, but by how it manages what it removes. Once something disappears without explanation, the story becomes larger than the object itself. And the murals were not the only pieces of public art to fall into this cycle. Beyond the walls of the concourses, parts of the airport's most recognizable landmarks have carried the same effect. Features meant to be decorative or ceremonial that, in the eyes of visitors, raised questions far stranger than the airport's designers intended. Masonic stones and deadly statues. Inside DIA's terminal and along the road that leads to it, two features stand out as especially emblematic of the airport's strange reputation: the marble Masonic dedication stone set into the floor of the Great Hall and the 32-foot horse statue glowing with red eyes at the entrance. Both were installed as ceremonial gestures, part of the airport's routine art and public architecture. Yet over years of rumor and speculation, each has accumulated layers of meaning far beyond what the designers intended. The Capstone was unveiled in 1994 at the airport's opening ceremony. Like similar dedication markers at other public buildings, it includes the date, governor's name, and leaders involved in the project. But one feature immediately draws attention: the symbol of the Freemasons etched prominently on its face, along with the words New World Airport Commission. The Masonic engraving has precedent. The group has historically participated in cornerstone ceremonies across the United States. The real spark for speculation lies in the wording. No long-standing New World Airport Commission existed. In reality, the phrase referred to a publicity group organized by conductor Charles Anspacher for the grand opening. Local arts organizations and businesses came together to promote Denver International as a gateway to the modern world, adopting the name deliberately for its aspirational tone. That initiative dissolved after the airport's debut, but its phrasing, so close to New World Order, a phrase already loaded in conspiracy circles, ensured that observers would connect the stone to global power myths. Airport staff have explained this history numerous times. Still, the etched granite remains. A permanent reference without context is a magnet for speculation. Casual travelers who pause to read it rarely know about Anspacher's civic promotion campaign. Lacking that detail, they treat the words literally, a named organization they cannot otherwise trace. Because the stone cannot be changed, the controversy replays every year through new visitors encountering the phrasing for the first time. Beneath the capstone lies a time capsule placed during the dedication. Officials describe it as containing cultural materials from local schools, civic groups, and the city of Denver, yet no full inventory was ever released publicly. That omission has fed questions. If the capsule was meant to represent the region's everyday life, why not publish its contents openly? Most likely, the decision was mundane. Such capsules often have minimal record keeping, but the lack of clarity ensures that the sealed cavity acquires more imaginative weight than its real contents probably deserve. When set against DIA's broader myths of secrecy and underground space, this dedication stone can't escape suspicion. A standard marker in another building becomes loaded with sinister possibility here. Instead of seeing the Freemason imprint as ceremonial habit, many equate it with hidden influence. Instead of seeing the New World Airport Commission as a dated publicity title, they connect it to fears of global control. Context may explain, but speculation endures. If the capstone quietly unsettles in the terminal, the horse statue delivers impact the instant a driver approaches the grounds. Officially titled Mustang, it was commissioned under the airport's public art program and created by sculptor Luis Jimenez. Towering 32 feet, painted glossy electric blue, and fitted with LED lights that give the eyes a luminous red glow, it quickly earned its unofficial nickname, Blucifer. The design was intended to commemorate the wild spirit of the American West, its power and independence made monumental. But reactions diverged from that interpretation almost immediately. With its bulging veins, flaring nostrils, and glaring eyes, many saw menace instead of inspiration. The nickname captured that tension, and within a few years most locals and travelers alike had adopted it. Then the story darkened further during the sculpture's construction. In 2006, a section of the horse broke apart in the artist's studio and fatally injured Jimenez himself. The tragedy left an imprint that no amount of official description could erase. By the time the finished piece was installed 3 years later, its history had already fused myth with accident. It is not unusual for public art to acquire unintended meaning, but Blucifer's narrative grew unique. The glowing red eyes were chosen in part to honor Jimenez's father, who worked with neon but were read by thousands of travelers as malevolent. The fact that they glow day and night intensified the effect. Add to this the lethal accident, and folklore quickly developed describing the horse as cursed. That folklore has persisted for nearly 2 decades, retold in local humor as much as in online conspiracy discussions. In 2024, maintenance crews worked on the statue once again. After decades exposed to Colorado weather, it required restoration to both fiberglass surface and internal steel. Contractors faced structural and electrical problems, standard for an outdoor sculpture of that size and age. The wiring for the eyes had degraded, forcing replacement. Joints showed stress. These kinds of issues were expected, yet the reports sounded unusual enough to spark a wave of online claims about hidden malfunctions. Local coverage framed it in plain terms: expensive refurbishment, extensive wiring replacement, and restabilization. In forums, though, the simple phrase, electrical issues, reinforced the impression of something uncontrollable. The airport described these challenges as routine preservation, noting that any major outdoor installation develops problems after decades. For those already familiar with the statue's tragic history, the details functioned differently, as confirmation that the piece was bound to dysfunction. While there was nothing paranormal in technicians replacing corroded wires, the imagery of flickering eyes at the airport's entrance reanimated talk of curses. Both the statue and the capstone occupy official documented roles. The first exists in the context of Denver's public art program, which allocates a portion of major construction budgets to large-scale installations. The second is a ceremonial marker, a practice common in American civic architecture. They are not accidents or illicit modifications. Yet because of their features, the one with ominous phrasing, the other tied to tragedy, they have consistently been recast into a mythology of secrecy. Each is folded back into the larger narrative, where DIA is never simply functional, but charged with hidden meaning. Tourists stop to photograph the capstone, often crouching to decipher its language. Locals tell newcomers about Blucifer with a mix of pride and unease. Online threads keep both alive as symbolic proof of the airport's strangeness. In practice, they serve as ordinary markers of art and ceremony. In perception, they are among the strongest symbols that fuel theories about DIA's true nature. These landmarks persist because they offer visible reference points. Unlike rumors of deep tunnels or concealed bunkers, the stone and the horse are tangible. Every person who enters Denver International passes them, confronts their symbols, and responds emotionally to their presence. They stabilize suspicion within something physical. That visible permanence ensures they remain touchstones long after their original purposes have been forgotten. Across 30 years, the capstone and the statue have grown into fixtures of speculation, anchoring the airport's mythology in plain sight. They demonstrate how easily routine civic gestures can be transformed into symbols of mystery. And because they stand at opposite ends of the airport, the first embedded at its core, the second towering on the periphery, they bracket Denver International in an aura of unanswered questions. But even enduring symbols beg a larger question. What are they marking? For travelers who see them as more than decoration, the suspicion that the airport guards hidden structures remains unresolved. And once people begin to speculate about what might stretch beneath a site of this size, the conversation inevitably drifts to a facility only 90 miles away, an installation already famous for being hidden deep underground. The NORAD connection. Conversations about Denver International's uncharted underground often circle back to one recurring possibility, a hidden link to NORAD. Since the 1990s, speculation has suggested that the airport's unfinished tunnels and unexplained sealed spaces might form part of a corridor heading south toward Cheyenne Mountain, where NORAD's Cold War fortress still operates outside Colorado Springs. The distance, about 90 miles, makes it unlikely in practical terms, yet the theory has held on for decades precisely because it fits into an already mysterious narrative. In public imagination, no pairing could feel more natural than a sprawling, enigmatic airport and the nation's most famous underground command center. When examined closely, however, engineers and skeptics argue that such a tunnel would be nearly impossible to conceal. Digging a corridor of that length big enough for personnel or vehicles would mean moving millions of tons of earth. Those excavation signatures would linger on the surface and in environmental assessments for years. Utilities such as ventilation shafts, pump stations, and power feeds would also be necessary along the route, and these would inevitably appear in satellite imagery or land surveys. No such evidence has ever been recorded. For scientists and infrastructure experts, that absence is decisive. Had a project of this magnitude ever taken place, it could not have been hidden. Proponents counter with historical precedent. NORAD itself was carved into the granite of Cheyenne Mountain during the Cold War in a project that remained classified until nearing completion. To believers, this shows that large-scale subterranean engineering can be masked through secrecy, dispersed contracts, and careful control of information. They lean on DIA's well-documented cost overruns during the early 1990s, pointing out that billions of extra dollars were spent without full accounting. If some fraction of that funding supported preliminary tunneling, the paper trail could already have been obscured 3 decades ago. Supporters also highlight geography. Between Denver's plains and Colorado Springs, the terrain is relatively forgiving, rolling foothills rather than sheer mountain walls. In theory, tunneling through these layers is less demanding than boring through solid granite. A skeptical engineer would still stress the costs, but for conspiracists, this geography seems to offer plausibility. If one were ever to design an underground connection between a civilian hub and a military command site, they argue this type of transitional terrain would make sense. Yet plausibility does not equal probability. Civil engineers note that even the most basic tunnel projects often span a decade or more and require visible staging grounds, waste piles, and industrial equipment. Consider Europe's Channel Tunnel, 30 miles long, built over 6 years, visible at every stage, famously over budget. Expanding that scale to 90 miles beneath Colorado would have required 3 times as much material and far more logistical support, all without a trace leaking into public records. To experts in underground construction, that improbability outweighs any argument of hidden budget lines or quiet terrain. Still, the NORAD angle resonates because it feels anchored in strategic logic. Continuity of government planning has long included hardened bunkers and redundant command centers. In that framework, it is not unreasonable to imagine secondary shelters or hidden lifelines connecting transport hubs to command facilities. DIA, with its enormous footprint and unfinished sections, makes a tempting candidate for for those who assume disaster planning goes further than the public is told. The idea that personnel, equipment, or even evacuees could transfer directly from an airport to a subterranean fortress appeals to the imagination, even if there is no material proof it exists. Whistleblowers and construction workers have occasionally claimed they saw hints of such planning. Some recall early schematics mentioning continuity links before references were edited out of later versions. Others describe overhearing supervisors use the phrase NORAD connection during routine work. Documents never surfaced to confirm these stories, but the overlap in language is notable, and it sustains the suspicion that the link was at least considered at some stage. Whether these rumors reflected genuine drafts or simply circulated job site gossip is impossible to determine. The appeal of that suspicion renews whenever new details surface about DIA's tunnels. In 2024, when crews reported entering uncharted underground spaces, some observers immediately lined those findings against the NORAD theory. If there are corridors beneath the airport unaccounted for, enthusiasts reason, why discount the idea they extend further? Skeptics rebut this by underscoring a principle: tunnels within airport grounds can be explained by scrapped infrastructure or utility channels. Extending them 90 miles south would multiply complexity 100-fold, demanding ventilation towers and surface structures no satellite has ever captured. This back and forth illustrates why the NORAD theory is unusually persistent. Both sides have fuel. For skeptics, engineering makes the project untenable. For believers, DIA's sheer size, wasteful construction history, and unexplained gaps in its record leave too much gray area to dismiss outright. The contrast ensures the idea never fades. It is improbable but irresistible, a theory that carries just enough strategic logic to keep returning even when facts weigh against it. To this day, official sources dismiss the notion in firm terms. No public budget records or environmental assessments show traces of a massive excavation. Cheyenne mountain operations themselves have been largely scaled back, with command responsibilities moved to Peterson Space Force Base years ago. Against that reality, the idea of a 90-mile lifeline between Denver and Colorado Springs looks even less practical. And yet the phrase, NORAD connection, never disappears from discussion. Anytime DIA's mysteries rise into public debate, that phrase surfaces again, an anchor point for those convinced more exists beneath the airport than has ever been admitted. In practice, the NORAD story reflects more about perception than infrastructure. The conspiracy carries cultural weight because it attaches DIA's peculiar history to one of America's most iconic hidden facilities. Together, they form a narrative pairing almost too powerful to ignore. A massive airport infamous for secrecy and a mountain bunker synonymous with Cold War survival. Even without proof, the story has coherence, and within communities already suspicious of DIA, coherence is enough to keep the theory alive. What remains, then, is less about whether such a tunnel exists and more about why so many continue repeating the idea. The connection's persistence signals the depth of doubt surrounding Denver International. Every unexplained corridor, every sealed door, is drawn into the same magnetic field of speculation. NORAD, though 90 miles away, becomes the imagined destination for everything that cannot otherwise be explained. And in the absence of blueprints or physical evidence, speculation shifts to something harder to ignore: the voices of those who say they witnessed underground details directly. Long after engineers and officials dismissed theories as impractical, stories began to surface from people claiming first-hand access to what lay beneath the concrete. By the end of 2024, those accounts were being repeated more widely than ever, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic developments in Denver International's history. Testimonies that suggested the hidden space under the airport was not just a web of tunnels, but entire levels designed for purposes never described in the official record. Whistleblowers and hidden levels. In late 2024 and continuing into 2025, some of the most debated claims about Denver International Airport no longer came from researchers, journalists, or satellite sleuths. They came from people who said they had worked inside the airport itself. A wave of whistleblower accounts surfaced online, and in local media, many from contractors tied to different phases of construction or renovation. In the past, scattered voices had spoken of unusual underground spaces, but this time the theme was consistent enough to draw broader attention. Workers described not just tunnels, but fully formed levels extending beneath the known airport footprint. That phrase, levels, appeared again and again. These accounts did not center on one hidden chamber or a short service passage. They described tiered subfloors stacked below the recognized utilities. According to those workers, heavy elevators descended past the documented maintenance corridors and opened into reinforced platforms that stretched outward like hubs. Inside those sublevels were features that looked prepared for use. Conduits mounted along finished walls, ventilation ductwork welded into ceilings, and distribution panels in place, as if awaiting connection. To the people recounting their memories, it seemed less like abandoned infrastructure and more like whole facilities designed to remain ready for occupancy. Several of the claims included vivid examples. One whistleblower recalled walking into a chamber tall enough to resemble an aircraft hangar, a space too wide and polished to fit the proportions of a baggage tunnel. Another said he encountered corridors fitted with permanent lighting and climate ducting rather than the temporary systems typical in construction staging. Taken together, the descriptions painted a picture of order, not accident, sublevels arranged deliberately rather than incidental voids left in concrete pores. What strengthened their impact was not that any individual account was extraordinary, but that unrelated individuals used the same terms and reported the same kinds of features decades apart. Reports converged on a common set of details: reinforced floors, industrial-scale air handling, wide halls with utility brackets already installed. Different workers used different words, but the elements repeated enough to sound more like observation than coincidence. At the same time, it is important to note that no official schematics, public design documents, or airport planning records have ever corroborated the idea of multi-floor subterranean complexes under DIA. On the record, airport officials are clear. The only underground facilities are transit tunnels, utility conduits, and remnants of the failed baggage system. Requests for access or transparency beyond those areas have always been denied. That contrast, the overlap of testimonies on one side and unwavering official denial on the other, is exactly why the topic endures in conspiracy discussions. Some of the most striking overlaps involved timing. An electrician who worked in 1994 described elevator shafts that descended deeper than the published plans. A year later, a separate worker tied to excavation support spoke of similarly reinforced floors and strange padlocked doors. 2 decades later, a renovator claimed he too saw elevator access leading downward, sealed off from public reach. The workers never met and did not work at the same time, yet they used nearly identical phrasing. That kind of pattern is what analysts call a curiosity gap: different people, disconnected in time, describing what appear to be the same hidden elements. Skeptics say the similarity results from rumor and echo. Believers argue consistency itself functions as indirect evidence. As for purpose, speculation ranges widely. Supporters of the bunker theory argue that such finished sublevels fit the design profile of secure shelters. They point to ventilation ducts and heavy reinforced walls as evidence that large groups of people could be housed underground in an emergency. Others imagine the spaces as staging zones, hangar-like bays where vehicles or equipment could remain protected out of sight. Meanwhile, those doubting the most dramatic theories counter that wide chambers and solid reinforcement can emerge from mundane needs. Overbuilt mechanical hubs, soil stabilization, or utility corridors made broad for safety. Without floor plans or usable blueprints, distinguishing between ordinary overbuilding and extraordinary intent remains impossible. Reliability of the accounts depends largely on interpretation. Supporters highlight how ducts and conduit lines are technical elements unlikely to be confused by skilled tradespeople. They argue that ordinary workers know the difference between a rough cut of unfinished concrete and a polished wall prepared for permanent systems. Skeptics argue that memory degrades over decades, that workers saw only fragments of incomplete construction, and that later narratives filled in blanks with rumor. Absent photographs or schematics, both positions remain speculative. One of the recurring frustrations lies in the airport's silence. If stories of hidden levels are entirely fabricated, critics ask why the airport does not offer public tour of the known sub-basements to demonstrate that nothing mysterious lies beneath. Instead, much of DIA's undercroft remains inaccessible except to authorized staff, behind secured doors and signage prohibiting entry. To an airport managing one of the most complex transportation systems in the country, such restrictions are normal. To rumor networks, they look like evidence. The lack of visibility maintains the cycle. The more sealed areas there are, the easier it is for suspicions to grow. By 2025, whistleblower accounts numbered in the dozens, enough to expand into a full category of folklore. Some gave interviews while blurring identifying details to avoid career repercussions. Others posted anonymously in forums, often citing fear of non-disclosure agreements. The effect was cumulative. None provided blueprints. None offered continuous video evidence. Yet each supplied fragments that lined up too neatly with others to be dismissed outright. That cumulative alignment gave the story weight, not the weight of proof, but the weight of persistence. At its core, the debate highlights a single contradiction. Official documents depict only conventional infrastructure, with no mention of finished sublevels. Meanwhile, whistleblower accounts across 3 decades describe the same elements: levels, ducts, sealed elevators, reinforced hangar-like spaces. Both cannot be entirely true at once. Either memories are misleading, or official documentation leaves something undescribed. The gap between the two possibilities is the precise space where conspiracy narratives thrive. Some arguments focus less on function and more on timing. If supposed hidden levels were built during DIA's chaotic early 1990s construction, the project's massive cost overruns could have covered them. Billions were spent, and discrepancies in contracting were frequent. From this angle, secret subfloors would not require ongoing hidden budgets, only unexplained expense at the start. Whether or not that logic holds, it represents one of the reasons the whistleblower accounts resonate. They mesh neatly with other unexplained pieces of DIA's history. The persistence of these testimonies underscores how Denver International remains unusual in perception. Every major airport restricts access to its utilities, but not every major airport has repeated accounts of entire hidden floors. Without corroborating evidence, the claims remain just that, claims, but the detail within them creates enough narrative tension to sustain ongoing debate. For travelers already conditioned to see DIA as more than an ordinary airport, the phrase, "floors beneath floors," rings with possibility. And while those accounts focus on what might exist underground, suspicions about DIA are not limited to the concrete below. Some mysteries emerge above the surface, in events recorded not by contractors, but by the instruments of pilots themselves. Reports involving strange interference in the skies suggest that whatever makes Denver International unusual also extends into the air around it. That shift adds yet another dimension to the airport's reputation, moving attention from hidden rooms underfoot to unexplained signals in the open atmosphere. Electromagnetic oddities in the skies. Airports depend on precision in their skies. Pilots expect navigation equipment to respond reliably because any slip in accuracy can create delays or confusion. Yet for years, Denver International has become the subject of anecdotal reports suggesting navigation quirks appear there more often than at comparable airports. These stories describe compasses that swing briefly off course, radios breaking into sudden static, and cockpit displays flickering at unusual times. None of this has been officially confirmed as abnormal by aviation regulators, but the consistency of reports has fueled ongoing speculation that the skies around Denver harbor electromagnetic oddities. Compass deviations are among the most frequently repeated accounts. Pilots on approach have described their heading indicators drifting off by several degrees before correcting within seconds. It happens too quickly to endanger operations, but crews accustomed to smooth instrument reading notice immediately. What puzzles operators is when these drifts occur on clear days, without storm activity large enough to explain them. Some flyers recount instruments disagreeing with ground-based systems momentarily before realigning near fixed points in the approach corridor. These are not official incident reports logged with national aviation databases, but they circulate in pilot forums and word of mouth. For many who rely on navigation precision, even short-lived vibrations in the data stand out. Weather radar oddities form another theme. At Denver's altitude, turbulence is normal, and the Rockies can shift air masses quickly. Yet crews sometimes describe radar returns behaving inconsistently compared with nearby airports. Accounts note phantom echoes streaking across displays, narrow corridors filled with visual noise, or uplinks to air traffic losing clarity mid-broadcast. Delays often increase when screens must be rechecked or signals verified. While most experienced crews attribute radar quirks to mountain meteorology, the fact that reports concentrate at Denver, while similar terrain airports like Salt Lake City or Calgary log fewer anecdotes raises questions. Technicians reviewing patterns say that in isolation, each glitch looks unremarkable, but clustered together over decades, they develop a reputation difficult to ignore. Radio disruptions add another layer. Several pilot accounts describe sudden bursts of static overwhelming otherwise clear frequencies, sometimes forcing transmissions to repeat before readable instructions pass through. Even moments of lost communication at a high-volume hub can cascade, requiring controllers to pause and reissue commands across multiple aircraft. Those extra seconds accumulate across hundreds of flights per day. Though reports are scattered and infrequent, their repetition from decade to decade has sustained the impression of something systematically unusual in Denver's airspace. Still, no official aviation safety authority has classified such interference as unique to DIA, and all procedures continue with redundancies in place to protect safety. Official explanations lean heavily on geography. Denver stands a mile above sea level, where mountain and plains weather collide. Thunderstorms generate electromagnetic surges, while static discharges can briefly distort compasses, radios, and radar screens. Nearly any burst of storm activity can account for the types of interference pilots describe. Meteorologists often argue that these conditions make Denver inevitability prone to elevated anomalies, rather than evidence of hidden systems. Aviation experts point out that such glitches are not uncommon across mountain airports worldwide, and robust redundancies are engineered precisely so they cannot compromise flight safety. Without central data proving a unique pattern tied specifically to Denver International, such reports remain intriguing anecdotes rather than systemic faults. Critics of the storm explanation emphasize detail in the accounts. If weather alone caused interference, one would expect disruption to vary randomly with shifting conditions. Instead, some pilot testimonies claim that compass wander or static tends to spike in specific flight corridors, as though tied to consistent locations. This regularity has led independent researchers to speculate about fixed sources, ground-based transmission experiments, buried power systems, or environmental spillover from underground facilities. Some have even linked the stories to whistleblower accounts of heavy electrical installations beneath DIA's surface. While no tested evidence substantiates those claims, the overlap between accounts sustains suspicion. Whether accurate or not, the theory feeds back into Denver's reputation for secrecy. Where official weather data leaves ambiguity, conspiracy narratives thrive. Enthusiasts suggest that if interference consistently clusters at Denver, it may bleed upward from whatever equipment supports rumored underground complexes. Suppose hidden bunkers require extensive power and communication systems, they argue, then bleed over might appear in the skies as compass drift, flickering displays, and bursts of static. Whistleblower accounts describing reinforced chambers with conduits running across ceilings become part of this chain of thought. None of these claims stand as documented findings, but grouped together, they give conspiracy literature its sense of plausibility. Even without conspiratorial framing, anecdotes about electromagnetic anomalies persist because operations at the airport remain complicated. Denver was built with one of the most advanced runway layouts in the world, designed specifically to reduce traffic jams and absorb delay pressure. Yet statistics consistently show higher than expected delays, particularly during storm-heavy seasons. Passengers often see weather listed on departure screens, but critics question whether electromagnetic anomalies could be one of several hidden contributors. Analysts studying long-term operational data stop short of declaring electromagnetic sources responsible, but some propose that the need to double-check unusual readings could add incremental holdups. In this view, reported quirks may not compromise safety, but if real, could explain why flights stack up more frequently than the layout suggests they should. One important caveat frames all of these suspicions. No official, peer-reviewed aviation database confirms systemic electromagnetic issues unique to DIA. The FAA and other bodies acknowledge routine turbulence, lightning, and radio noise typical of high-altitude operations. Beyond those, there is no published study verifying that Denver suffers more interference than its peers. Aviation experts stress that instrument anomalies are most often weather-related, and that triple redundancy across cockpit systems prevents them from presenting genuine hazard. Without controlled data comparing Denver directly against other airports, reported oddities remain within the realm of pilot anecdotes, reinforced by repetition rather than confirmed by science. Still, perception matters. Travelers rarely know about compass readings or radar echoes, but they do experience the consequences of delays. When anecdotal accounts circulate online and are paired with Denver's wider reputation for secrecy, stories about electromagnetic fields blend seamlessly into a broader mythology. In that mythology, the line between technical glitch and hidden design blurs. Minneapolis may suffer storm delays too, but only Denver International has murals that looked apocalyptic, statues with glowing eyes, and a history of unfinished tunnels beneath. Against that backdrop, electromagnetic chatter in the skies seems less like aviation trivia and more like one more chapter in a long-running mystery. Aviation thrives on measurement and predictability, so repeated stories of odd disruptions strike a sharper chord here than they would elsewhere. Even slight deviation becomes material because aircraft rely on full consistency, not partial. When stories line up across years and across unrelated crews, observers begin to treat them like pattern rather than coincidence. Whether the pattern reflects storm dynamics or something hidden beneath remains uncertain. The absence of a clear answer is what gives the subject its longevity. Whatever the explanation, the enduring debate about interference has practical implications. Pilots note it, crews prepare for it, and conspiracy theorists treat it as confirmation that DIA operates above and beyond ordinary airports. Yet despite all the unease, flights continue safely and regularly. The tension lies in the contrast between uneventful landings and stubborn rumors that consistency masks something still unexplained. That ongoing ambiguity paves the way for a more grounded question. If anomalies in the sky are uncertain, why do delays consistently mount on the ground? Travelers cannot prove electromagnetic disruption, but they can see crowded departure boards and missed connections firsthand. And in Denver's case, those congestion patterns are difficult to square with an airport specifically designed to eliminate them. Delays and flight pattern mysteries. In 2024, Denver International processed roughly 82.3 million passengers, placing it among the 10 busiest airports on Earth. By scale, it functions as one of the largest air travel hubs in existence. With that kind of operational load, the airport's layout should be a safeguard against congestion. On paper, it looks designed for efficiency. 6 long, widely separated runways, including one that stretches over 16,000 feet, longer than most commercial airports in the United States. Such a layout was meant to allow multiple takeoffs and landings at once, removing the bottlenecks that plague other facilities. Yet despite that engineering, delays at DIA remain consistently notable, a paradox that regular travelers have long remarked upon. Analysts inside the aviation industry often highlight that Denver's delay rates outpace expectation. Airports with fewer runways, hemmed in by surrounding cities, such as Atlanta or Dallas, sometimes manage to clear flights faster, even with similar or greater traffic volumes. Denver sits on open plains with no urban sprawl pressing against its perimeter, which should give it room to spread operations and maximize throughput. Nevertheless, boards filled with delayed arrival times and long ground queues have become part of the airport's reputation. The mismatch between resources and outcomes is what makes Denver stand out. Industry commentary tends to explain the problem in more conventional terms. The airport's elevation, tucked just east of the Rockies, brings weather complications that most hubs never face. Sudden crosswinds, snow bursts, and fast-forming storms interfere with sequencing, forcing controllers to widen the spacing between aircraft and slow rotations. High altitude alone changes engine thrust and climb rates, small complications that become magnified when multiplied across hundreds of flights per day. In this frame, delays are technical, not mysterious, part of the cost of operating in such a volatile air environment. But unlike explanations that dismiss every complaint as weather, passenger experience often produces doubt. Travelers watch wide stretches of open runway sit unused as their aircraft idles short of takeoff, or they circle in clear skies before clearance is granted. From the ground, those pauses do not look like sudden storms or mechanical bottlenecks. They look like gaps whose causes remain invisible to the public. That gap between visible infrastructure and opaque explanation is why alternative theories continually grow. One recurring suspicion is that Denver maintains heavier than usual airspace restrictions. Pilots have noted that arrival corridors can feel compressed even when the runways appear wide open, as if boundaries cut out usable sky. Such restrictions are normal near secure installations, where military activity requires tight zones. At Denver, no such official facilities are acknowledged, yet holding patterns above the planes feed the impression that parallel operations are being curtailed by forces outside the view of passengers. Fold into those perceptions reports of electromagnetic quirks and anecdotal interference, and some observers supply their own connection. They argue that controllers take extra caution precisely because systems may be more vulnerable to error, spacing aircraft farther apart than the layout requires. In this interpretation, delays are a byproduct of invisible risks. Industry experts remain careful in rebutting this point. No study has ever shown systemic interference unique to Denver, but cautious spacing by controllers is standard practice when conditions are complex. Thus, what looks like wasted runway capacity to passengers may in fact reflect operational prudence. Beyond technical possibilities, another theory floats persistently, that Colorado's most expensive airport has competing obligations. Some argue that DIA's sprawling grounds and underground structures shape flight paths in subtle ways. If buried works restrict construction zones, if certain surface areas sit idle for reasons never discussed, then air operations may be managed around them. This perception hardened in 2024 when new expansion projects again disrupted ground operations while resurfacing reports of uncharted tunnels. For theorists, the timing of construction overlaps with mounting delays are more than coincidence. Yet evidence remains circumstantial, and no architectural record has linked operational pauses to hidden facilities. Among aviation specialists, that hypothesis holds little support compared to weather and sequencing. The passenger view, however, is less forgiving. A delay is a delay, whatever the technicalities. Travelers miss connecting flights, hotel reservations slide, and airlines absorb compounding costs. Crews stranded with grounded aircraft strain scheduling, raising operational expenses across entire networks. For the average family waiting on DIA's concourses, the reasons matter less than the outcome. Denver feels harder to navigate, harder to rely upon than other major hubs they frequent. Over time, that frustration has reshaped the airport's image. Where murals and statues are curiosities, delays are unavoidable. Conspiracy communities frequently point to this detail. Everyone, without exception, experiences delay patterns. Unlike subterranean chambers or rumored connections to NORAD, travelers do not need insider testimony. They simply compare their time in Denver to their time at other airports. Theories multiply from that shared grounding in personal inconvenience. Some argue airspace is prioritized for unseen purposes. Others connect the inefficiency to electromagnetic caution or the baggage system's lingering constraints. But even those less inclined toward conspiracies note the paradox. How can an airport with so much land and so many runways still feel bogged down? Professional observers remain frustrated by the same paradox, though their explanations rest on practical factors. Reports highlight that sequencing long-haul flights in Denver requires more gradual takeoff spacing because of altitude and weather volatility. Winter months in particular generate cascading delays because even small stalls in snow clearance ripple outward across schedules. Yet for analysts, as for passengers, the comparison to peer airports lingers. Snow closes Boston or Chicago with similar severity, yet their recovery rates are often faster. Though explanations exist, the incongruity provides fertile ground for speculation. One illustrative scenario captures the issue. A commercial jet sits at the end of one of Denver's 6 runways, engines running, wings de-iced, conditions clear. On the ground, no other plane visibly blocks its departure, yet clearance remains delayed for an additional 20 minutes. That scene, repeated across dozens of operations daily, makes passengers doubt formal explanations. It looks less like sequencing and more like invisible constraints. In the official record, weather and safety dictate those pauses. In rumor networks, restrictions tied to hidden sites or underground structures are the culprit. The truth remains divided between perception and procedure. Industry reports place Denver's delays within a framework of geographic challenge, difficult altitude, and operational conservatism. Speculative accounts attach them to conspiratorial infrastructures, electromagnetic influence, and concealed construction priorities. Both sides agree only on the central fact: Denver International produces more delays than its design suggests it should. And that contradiction has become embedded in the airport's reputation. What sets this paradox apart is that it is not only debated in online forums, but reinforced by everyday experience. Murals, tunnels, and statues may seem distant curiosities, but hours of waiting are lived realities that every traveler can measure. In this way, delays provide the most tangible evidence, if not of hidden agendas, then at least of mismatch between promise and performance. And that consistency has had an unexpected cultural outcome. When inefficiencies and mysteries are no longer denied or ignored, they become part of the story travelers tell about the place itself. At Denver International, the interruptions of travel time helped set the stage for something few airports experience: transformation from a site of irritation into a known source of intrigue. Tourism by conspiracy. Denver International's reputation as a place surrounded by suspicion has slowly shifted into something else: a marketing tool. Where the airport once issued defensive statements and tried to tamp down questions, it now leans into its image with deliberate humor. Instead of brushing off accusations about lizard people, tunnels, or coded artwork, the airport reframes those rumors in its own voice. What started as whispers of secrecy has turned into a public relations strategy that treats conspiracies as part of the entertainment. For an airport of DIA's scale, this represents a notable transformation, moving from denial to self-mockery. Anyone walking through the terminal construction zones sees this shift firsthand. Temporary walls that once carried standard messages about improvements coming soon now carry tongue-in-cheek signs. Some joke about hidden lizard people, while others suggest workers are digging tunnels to places no one should find. The humor signals awareness. Officials know their reputation, and instead of running from it, they meet it with a wink. That wink creates 2 reactions. For casual travelers, it feels like a way of making the space less sterile and more engaging. For those who already believe something secret is buried on site, the jokes feel less like parody and more like mock confession. Instead of quiet reassurance, DIA answers with irony, making skeptics suspicious and tourists curious. The consequences are visible. Unlike most airports, which people treat only as waypoints, DIA now draws travelers who deliberately want to look around. Visitors take photos in front of joke warning signs. They stop to record themselves at the Masonic Capstone, asking aloud what may rest in the sealed time capsule below. Families pose with the glowing eyes of the massive blue horse statue at the entrance. Even the murals that were once criticized for their imagery now attract attention in guided tour or in photos labeled online as proof of symbolism. For the airport, every selfie becomes free publicity. Oddities that once caused bad press now generate attention few marketing campaigns could buy. This cultural turn has created a kind of tourism unique to Denver. Tour operators outside the airport even offer city tour that highlight DIA's features alongside downtown landmarks. Visitors who once rolled past the airport without a second thought now treat it as a destination worth exploring. Both the statue and the murals that once spurred skepticism have been reframed as sightseeing stops. Airport tour linger on art walls or tell stories about sculpture commissions. Staff explain artist intentions, but many participants attend not for the official interpretation, but to see, in person, the pieces they first encountered through conspiracy channels. Social media amplifies the shift. Entire hashtags collect clips of DIA's quirks, mysterious doors, warning signs with jokes, and passengers speculating about what might be behind closed walls. Bloggers and YouTubers compile lists, 5 strangest sights inside the airport, why this airport is weirder than you think, and must-see conspiracies. Even when a video adopts a mocking tone, the visibility spreads DIA's mythology further. This dynamic fuels more tourism. Curious minds worldwide decide, if only on a layover, to walk through one of the only airports famous for strangeness instead of efficiency. Airport leadership has leaned into this deliberately. DIA has highlighted its own mythology in PR materials and, according to research, even incorporated conspiracy jokes into gift shop merchandise. The effect is practical. What could have been ongoing embarrassment is instead reframed as branding. By allowing visitors to laugh about lizards and bunkers, the airport reduces hostility while reshaping attention into foot traffic for its concourses. The humor doesn't erase suspicion, but it repositions it as something visitors can enjoy. Unlike other institutions, DIA has realized that silence invites rumor, but levity turns rumor into spectacle. Critics see risk in this approach. They argue that joking about myths while refusing to provide complete transparency encourages both casual dismissal and deeper suspicion. A construction wall declaring, "Yes, we're hiding something," may be meant as parody, but when that photo circulates online, it doubles as evidence for someone already convinced. Every playful reminder that DIA knows its reputation becomes, paradoxically, one more reason for tenacious believers to argue that concealment is real. The airport doesn't end debate, it balances reactions so that both sides walk away confirmed. Those skeptical smile at the wit, while conspiracy enthusiasts claim the wit masks truth. That tension raises a larger point. Few airports worldwide have this kind of narrative surrounding them. Many showcase modern architecture or landmark sculptures, but DIA remains unique in that its reputation as a hub of conspiracy has become as widely recognized as its role in aviation. Rather than attempting to silence that reputation, DIA strengthens it by playing along. The result is a cultural status closer to a roadside attraction than a travel hub. 30 years after opening, it is not primarily remembered for its record-breaking runways, but for strange stories and tongue-in-cheek humor about hidden depths. The paradox is that DIA functions simultaneously as infrastructure and spectacle. Travelers who grumble about long security lines or delays are the same ones who pause to take photos beside a mural or the horse statue. It is an airport where suspicion is sold as part of the experience without ever needing official validation. By reframing suspicion as entertainment, the airport ensures that rumors remain evergreen. Jokes about tunnels and lizard people, once harmful to reputation, now lock into the airport's identity. What makes this case distinctive is how efficiently it turns contradiction into advantage. Most transportation facilities guard against reputation damage with silence or correction. Denver chose a different path. Instead of a hush and deny strategy, DIA winks, and that wink ensures the stories never die. Whether observers walk away chuckling or worrying, they continue to talk about the airport long after leaving. In the landscape of airports competing for recognition, This guarantees Denver a cultural footprint no rival possesses. For all the playful branding, the unresolved tension remains. Some passengers enjoy the spectacle, others look past the jokes, and a few remain convinced signs and artwork hint at something larger. By weaving humor into its presentation, DIA has succeeded in keeping everyone engaged, whether as skeptics, tourists, or believers. The airport demonstrates how conspiracies can transform from accusations into cultural capital, precisely because nothing definitive has been proven or disproven. It thrives in ambiguity. That ambiguity is exactly why DIA continues to inspire fascination far beyond aviation circles. For every story about tunnels or statues, there now exists an equal story about tourists laughing at the same suspicions. Together, the stories sustain Denver International's status as the world's most unusual airport, not only because of its construction history, but because of how it decided to handle its reputation. After decades of doubt, it reframed suspicion as spectacle, and in doing so, solidified its place in modern mythology. And it is that mythology, the mixture of engineering marvels, artistic controversy, underground rumors, and intentional humor, that has left Denver International in a category by itself. The question that remains, however, is what this reputation truly says about the place. Because beneath the artwork, behind the jokes, and under the miles of reinforced concrete, one unresolved contradiction endures. Is DIA simply an airport embracing its eccentricity, or something more carefully staged? Denver International Airport is both a massive achievement in aviation planning and a continuing source of unanswered questions. It spans 53 square miles and moved about 82 million passengers in 2024, placing it among the busiest airports worldwide. Its automated baggage system stands as a documented, costly failure that left unused machinery underground, while new construction has added public tunnels for stormwater and de-icing. Yet unverified whistleblower accounts of hidden levels and sealed passageways persist. Rather than reject the reputation, the airport now plays into it with playful signage and branding. Until official archives open or tour provide full access, DIA's mix of art, infrastructure, and unanswered testimonies ensures one question lingers: what else lies beneath? What do you think is under DIA? Just utilities and abandoned projects, or something more carefully hidden? Share your thoughts in the comments.